late one humid evening in McAllen, Texas, just blocks from the winding Rio Grande, a routine shift at the Rio Care Family Health Center was winding down. Nurse Elena Marquez, her dark hair neatly pinned into a no-nonsense bun, was leaning over the registration desk, ticking off the last charts of the night. Though she'd only moved here from San Antonio a week ago, she was no stranger to the steady stream of hopeful immigrants seeking care on both sides of the border. At 35, Elena carried herself with the calm authority of someone well-practiced in handling life's emergencies. But tonight, even she felt the day's weariness in her bones. As the clinic emptied out, Elena's gaze drifted toward a small cluster of figures who had lingered in the waiting room longer than anyone else. A man in his early 40s, his shoulders tensed as if bracing against some invisible weight, and his 5 daughters, all decked out in matching jeans and bright, simple tops. They sat eerily still, each child as quiet and motionless as a statue, while around them the fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the worn tile floor reflected the harsh glow. Elena nudged her colleague, Nurse Carlos, who was busy keying in data at the computer. "Do you know who that family is?" she asked softly. Carlos glanced up, quirked an eyebrow, then went right back to his screen. "No idea. They've been waiting forever," he murmured, his tone distracted. Frowning, Elena rose and crossed the room, slipping into a friendly smile as she approached. "Good evening," she said, introducing herself. "I'm Nurse Elena Marquez. Have you had your vitals taken yet?" The father straightened, his dark eyes flicking toward her. "We're here to see Dr. Alan Briggs," he replied in a low, controlled voice. "Vaccinations and blood tests." Elena cocked her head. "That's odd. I don't believe Dr. Briggs is on duty tonight. He took an emergency call." She offered to check his schedule, but asked first to see their registration paperwork. The man handed over a folded form. Mateo Ruiz, age 42, accompanied by Sofia, 10, Isabella, 9, Valentina, 8, Anna, 7, and little Lucia, 5. Scanning the details, Elena felt a knot tighten in her stomach. These girls weren't scrolling through phones or whispering among themselves like bored kids usually do. They sat with such unnerving quiet that her professional instincts began to prickle. Something about their stillness felt off. Back at the nurse station, Carlos confirmed her suspicion. Dr. Briggs had indeed left the clinic. When Elena pointed out the nervous father and his statuesque daughters, Carlos waved her concern aside. "He's one of the doctor's regulars, and honestly, any parent would wish their children were that well-behaved," he said, almost cheerfully. But Elena couldn't shake her unease. She returned to Mateo, careful to sound polite yet firm. "I'm sorry, sir, but Dr. Briggs is not available tonight." The man's composure cracked for a split second, his jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening on the registration form. "You're not listening," he said, his voice suddenly tense. "Dr. Briggs himself told me to bring them here at this exact time." His eyes darted past Elena, flicking to the row of syringes and vials lined up behind her desk. That's when Elena remembered a flurry of late-night calls. The lab had just faxed over a set of alarming blood work results, flagged for an immediate review. Still at her station, she rifled through the printouts, scanning columns of numbers until her eyes locked on a pattern so grotesquely wrong that her breath caught in her throat. She glanced back at the Ruiz family, their faces framed by the harsh overhead lights, the children's features unnaturally pale. "Elena!" Carlos called, his voice pitched with sudden alarm. He'd stepped into the lab corridor and come face to face with the report. "These aren't normal values," he whispered. Elena's heart pounded. She motioned for Mateo to follow her into a private examination room. As they slipped inside, the gold plaque on the door reading Dr. Briggs taunted her. He wasn't there. She closed the door quietly, her body trembling with urgency. "Sir," she began, voice low, "I need you to tell me everything you know about your daughter's health. Because according to these results, something is very, very wrong." In the tense stillness that followed, Elena realized she might be racing against time to uncover a hidden danger, one that could change all their lives forever. "Maybe you could try contacting him directly," Elena suggested, her voice steady. "We find that many family physicians, especially someone like Dr. Briggs, often give out their personal numbers for follow-ups." Mateo's expression darkened. "What kind of service is this?" he snapped, voice rising. "You should call the doctor. We have an appointment here. This is his clinic." "I understand your frustration," Elena replied calmly. "Please excuse me while I see if I can reach him." She returned to the nurse's station, where Carlos was now juggling another patient. Elena picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Briggs's clinic line. No answer. She tried his home number from the hospital directory. Still nothing. As she listened to the endless rings, she glanced back at Mateo. He looked more and more on edge, scratching his head and pacing, his phone screen reflecting frantic messages or missed calls. Meanwhile, the 5 girls sat utterly motionless, their serene quietness even more unsettling against their father's obvious distress. After several fruitless attempts, Elena headed back to the waiting room to update him. She found Mateo standing at the foot of the emergency staircase, phone pressed to his ear. Through the half-open door, she caught snippets of his heated plea. "Tomorrow? Yes. Give me time. Please. I'll pay." Elena hesitated. Did anyone else hear? But the other patients were absorbed in their own concerns, the hum of the late-night shift masking his urgency. When Mateo hung up and returned, his face was composed once more, eyes betraying a tight tension. Elena offered a polite smile. "I'm sorry, but I couldn't reach Dr. Briggs at either number." Mateo ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I'm wasting time here," he muttered. "I need these vaccinations today. My plan to cross the border and apply for asylum depends on it. I arranged an official pickup. If we miss this window, everything falls apart." Elena glanced back at his paperwork, taking in the details she'd only skimmed before. "I see you need DTaP IPV for diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and polio, MMRV for measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella, plus hepatitis A and B, all required for your asylum paperwork, correct?" Mateo nodded curtly. "Yes?" "Fortunately, I'm a nurse practitioner," Elena continued, making a swift decision. "I can administer those vaccines myself. However, protocol here at the border clinic also requires a pre-vaccine blood panel, standard screening for hepatitis B, and a complete blood count." Mateo's eyes narrowed. "Blood tests? They don't need that. The children are healthy." "Due to our location," Elena explained gently, "we follow strict guidelines to protect patients and staff. Blood work must accompany any immunization." He paused, torn. Elena offered another route. "Alternatively, you could wait to see one of our other physicians, but there's a queue. You might only be slotted in if someone cancels." She added, "They would still order the same labs." Mateo hesitated, gaze flicking to the silent girls. "Would you handle everything yourself? Draw their blood, submit samples, check the results?" As a nurse practitioner, Elena replied, "Yes, I can order the tests and collect the specimens. I'll coordinate with the lab techs, but only the authorized personnel can finalize the official report." After a long moment, Mateo exhaled. "Okay," he agreed, relief washing over him. "I'll trust you." "Great," Elena said, motioning toward the corridor. "Please follow me." As they filed down the hallway, the uneven overhead lights cast shifting shadows on the walls. The girls rose in perfect lockstep behind their father, not a murmur or stray glance to break their disciplined silence. Elena led them toward the procedure room, her heart pounding. Everything about this family, especially the children's unnerving stillness, felt wrong. And with each step, Elena knew she had to uncover the truth hidden beneath those porcelain calm faces before it was too late. Elena led them into the small examination room, forcing a polite smile that barely concealed her rising anxiety as she welcomed them. "We'll begin with everyone's vitals, then proceed to the blood draw," she announced, guiding the 5 girls to the row of chairs along the wall. Matteo watched her every move, his steady gaze making her pulse quicken. But she focused on her tasks, the soft whir of the blood pressure cuff, the gentle click of the thermometer, the rhythmic beeping of the pulse oximeter, all set against the room's pale blue walls and the glare of fluorescent lights that seemed to amplify every shadow. She started with Sophia, gently placing the cuff around her slender arm, then checked her temperature and oxygen levels, offering small, friendly questions about school and favorite subjects, questions that drew only muted whispers and eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. "You're doing great," Elena praised, jotting down each number as if clinging to routine were the only way to steady her nerves. One by one, Isabella, Valentina, Anna, and little Lucia complied with the same eerie calm, minimal eye contact, soft one-word answers, and an unsettling stillness that contrasted sharply with the restlessness she'd expect from children their age. Matteo remained standing close by, arms folded, never taking his eyes off the proceedings. When Elena offered, "Would you like to wait outside while I draw their blood? Some parents find it hard to watch," he shook his head firmly. "No, I'll stay with my daughters." She nodded, respecting his decision, though every muscle in her body begged her to question his insistence. As Elena tied the tourniquet around Sophia's arm and swabbed her elbow, she whispered, "This will pinch a bit," and watched impassively as a single drop of blood trickled into the first vial. "So brave," Elena said, as she applied a bandage, but Sophia didn't blink. Each subsequent draw was identical, sterile efficiency punctuated by the girls' unnerving quiet. When she asked about their favorite games, Matteo intervened sharply. "They study. It's important for their future." The girls recoiled at his words, and Elena felt a chill. Gathering the labeled tubes, she invited them to wait for the results in the adjacent area. Matteo surprised her again by insisting they all follow her to the lab, where he introduced himself to the technician. "I'm Matteo Ruiz. These are my children's samples," he announced, as though guarding them against some unseen threat. Elena watched him protectively hover, her unease deepening with every silent step they took. Returning to her station, she couldn't shake the feeling that beneath this father's fierce devotion lay something far more troubling, something only the blood test might reveal. Elena ushered Matteo and his daughters into the treatment room, the faint antiseptic scent mingling with the quiet hum of the ceiling fan overhead. She motioned for Sophia to take the first seat and unpack the vaccine vials on the stainless steel tray beside her, each one gleaming under the fluorescent glare. "All right, Sophia," she began, her voice gentle but assured. "We're going to administer your DTaP IPV shot first. You did so well with the blood draw. This will be even quicker." As she swabbed the skin above the girl's shoulder blade, Matteo hovered at her elbow, jaw clenched, eyes flicking between the syringe and his eldest daughter. Elena inhaled deeply, then pressed the needle in with practiced precision. Sophia barely flinched. Without pause, Elena rotated to Isabella, then Valentina, Anna, and finally little Lucia, whose wide eyes betrayed a flicker of fear before she melted into her father's arms. Throughout the process, Matteo's restless pacing created an undercurrent of tension. Every few seconds he would lean in, as if to monitor the exact angle of the needle or the speed at which the vaccine entered his girl's arms. When Elena tapped the last plunger, she met his gaze. "They're done," she announced, sealing each site with a small bandage. "Now we'll give them a few minutes to rest before the MMRV." Matteo exhaled, a tight, rehearsed smile spreading across his face. "Thank you," he murmured, voice softer than before but still edged with urgency. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "Payment," he said simply, pressing it into Elena's hand. Her brow rose slightly, The clinic normally processes fees at the front desk. She looked at the crisp bills, then back at him. Without a word, he slipped the girls into Mateo's arms one by one, Lucia yawning so widely Elena thought she might see the back of her throat, and guided them out of the room before Elena could insist they settle payment properly. Left alone, Elena wiped down the tray, her mind racing. Something about the way Mateo had paid in cash, and so quickly, felt off. But the vaccinations were administered, the blood panel was clear, and there was no protocol left for her to enforce. She stepped into the hallway just in time to see the Ruiz family exiting through the front doors. In the parking lot, they melted into the humid dusk, Mateo's silhouette vanishing around the corner as he whispered to his daughters, urging them to keep walking. Elena stood on the threshold, the clinic's neon sign flickering behind her as she watched the empty street. She clicked her pen, reviewing the girls' charts one last time. Everything looked normal, yet her gut screamed that this was far from the end of their story. Had she done enough to safeguard those silent children, or merely ticked off another routine night in a border town where routine could be a dangerous illusion? She closed the file drawer with a soft click and headed back to the nurse's station, determined to follow up on every detail until she understood exactly who Mateo Ruiz really was, and why his daughters never said a single word. Elena's heart pounded as she watched Lucia whirl around the room, her little body light on its feet, laughter bubbling from her lips in silver notes that sounded almost alien after hours of oppressive silence. Anna, Isabella, and Sophia sat rigidly on the bench, eyes tracking their youngest sister's revival, while Valentina leaned against the sink, her cheeks flushed from the bout of nausea, but her posture more upright than before. "Mr. Ruiz," Elena said, gathering her courage and keeping her voice calm, "I need to speak with you, privately." She steered him toward the far corner of the room, where the soft humming of the autoclave offered a thin veil of privacy. "I've just noticed something very concerning. All 5 girls bear fresh puncture marks on their arms, like IV sites, and Lucia's sudden energy surge suggests she's only now coming out of sedation." She tapped lightly on her clipboard. "When we ran their blood panels earlier, there was no trace of sedatives or other drugs, but that test was drawn before I drew a second set of samples. I need to forward those to the lab." Mateo's face blanched. What are you accusing me of?" he hissed, glancing back at his daughters. Lucia had paused mid-twirl, her gaze flicking between her father and Elena, unease flickering in her bright eyes. "I'm not accusing anyone," Elena replied steadily. "But the safety of these children is my top priority. I need to confirm what's in their system right now. Please hand over your phone and any medications you've given them." Her tone left no room for argument. Mateo's jaw clenched, and he looked around, as though measuring his chances of escape. Then, with a resigned sigh, he retrieved a small plastic vial from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "This is what I give them," he muttered. Elena picked it up, noting the sterile label, just Home RX Dura Ruz 5 with no dosage instructions. She slid it into a sealed evidence bag and pressed a silent alert on her pager, which would summon security and social services to the ER area. "He's like this," Lucia piped up, her voice small but clear. "Dad says I get sick if I don't take my medicine." Her words trembled on the edge of tears. Elena knelt to Lucia's level, offering a soothing smile. "You did so well, sweetie. We're going to make sure you're all safe now." She glanced at Mateo, whose expression had crumpled into desperation. "Sir, until we know exactly what's in their system, I have to keep them here under observation. You understand that, don't you?" He swallowed hard, nodding once. I understand." Outside the room, 2 uniformed security officers and a caseworker from Child Protective Services appeared in the doorway. Elena rose, gesturing them in. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've got the samples here, and everything's been documented." As the officers moved toward Mateo and his daughters, Elena felt a shiver of relief mingled with sorrow. The girls had been brave, but at what cost? In the harsh fluorescent light, the happiest spark in Lucia's eyes seemed dimmed by the knowledge that her innocence had been used to silence a secret. That night, as the clinic's sliding doors swished closed behind the Ruiz family and the after-hours patrol car drove off into the humid Texas darkness, Elena Marquez vowed she would do everything in her power to ensure that no child in her care ever slipped back into a dangerous silence again. After several long, trembling breaths, Elena forced herself to sit upright, her back stiff against the cold vinyl of the clinic chair as adrenaline still coursed through her veins, and she reminded herself that the children were now safe beyond that. Locked door, their tiny lives secured at least for the moment by the vaccines she'd administered under duress, and so she wiped away the last trickle of tears with the sleeve of her scrubs and pressed her palms flat against her knees, grounding herself in the hard reality of the moment. She reached into her pocket for her phone, fingers still shaking, and scrolled to the secure messaging app she'd installed for emergencies, typing out a terse but comprehensive account of the night's events. Mateo Ruiz's threats, the hidden sedative marks, the illicit second blood draw and her concealed samples, attaching photos of the vial labels and time-stamped screenshots of his cash payment receipt, then hit send to the on-call chief medical officer and the local sheriff's narcotics division with a brief plea for immediate backup, even as she reminded herself to remain calm and professional, knowing that any sign of panic could endanger her colleagues or the family in custody. Once the messages had gone through, she exhaled again and stood, her legs momentarily unsteady, but she straightened her shoulders, checked the empty treatment room for any stray syringes or evidence, then locked the door behind her and strode down the corridor to the nurse's station, her steps measured, ready to brief Carlos and the administration on the next steps for protecting the girls, securing the samples, and ensuring that justice would move swiftly, because in a border town where trust was a fragile commodity and night could conceal both hope and danger, Elena Marquez knew that her resolve tonight might be the only thing standing between 5 fragile lives and an even darker fate. Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of inconsistencies have you seen? And with which doctors?" Marcus leaned back, glancing around to make sure they were still alone. "It's mainly been with blood panels for pediatric patients," he confided. "On nights when Dr. Briggs isn't here, his regular phlebotomist, Donnie, pulls double duty in the lab. A few of us noticed that the digital timestamps didn't match the paper logs, and some vials went missing from inventory." He tapped the printouts. "When I cross-checked today's run sheets, Valentina, Anna, and Lucia showed up in the system twice, once with clean results and again, just before closing, with sedatives detected." Elena's stomach churned. So someone deliberately swapped those clean samples for the spiked ones, then doctored the records? "Exactly," Marcus said, his eyes grave. "And the only person with access to both those sample drawers and the database entries at those times was Donnie. If he acted alone, but why was he talking to Mateo in the parking lot? And why insist on Dr. Briggs?" Elena pressed her palms against the counter, fighting to keep her thoughts from spinning. "We need concrete proof to involve the authorities. If Briggs is in on this, we can't go straight to the sheriff's office without risking a deeper cover-up." Marcus nodded. "We should gather every bit of digital evidence we can, access logs, camera footage, authorization records. Then call in someone outside this clinic, state police or the medical board's fraud division, so no one here can tip them off." Elena exhaled slowly. "I'll contact the chief medical officer and ask for archived CCTV from the lab corridor and the parking lot. Can you pull the audit trail on sample logins and edits to those Ruiz files?" "I'll get on it right now," Marcus replied, already tapping at the keyboard. As Marcus worked, Elena's phone buzzed with the sent confirmation of her earlier alert to the on-call supervisor. She typed a quick follow-up. "Urgent. Suspected internal tampering of pediatric blood samples. Please escalate to state oversight. With that message sent, she took a steadying breath. Somewhere down the hall, muffled voices drifted from the cashier's area. Probably the final patients of the night. Mateo and his daughters would be long gone by then. But thanks to these hidden vials and Marcus's support, Elena felt a spark of hope. She tapped her ID badge against the lab door panel and slipped out just as night shift security began their rounds. Under the dim corridor lights, Elena and Marcus moved swiftly to secure the evidence. A printed manifest of every Ruiz sample, the 2 sets of test results, and the newly generated audit logs. Next, they would review the CCTV, hoping to catch Donnie and, if necessary, Dr. Briggs on film exchanging those critical vials. Tonight, the clinic's veneer of safety had been shattered. But Elena Marquez, armed with truth and an unexpected ally, was determined to rebuild it for those 5 silent girls and many more who might otherwise vanish into the night. Carlos's admission hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, every heartbeat in that corridor seemed to echo in the tense hush that followed. The lead officer lowered his voice and leaned in toward Carlos. "Did you say he promised you money to keep quiet?" Carlos swallowed, glancing at Elena for support before he nodded. "Yes, sir. He offered cash. He called it a bonus if we didn't question his family's unusual behavior or ask too many questions about the lab results." Officer Ramirez barked an order into his radio. "All right, secure the scene and corroborate this testimony. We'll need written statements from all staff present." He turned back to Elena, whose knees still trembled from the adrenaline. "Ma'am, you did the right thing in calling us. Please stay close for the investigation." 2 uniformed officers escorted Mateo, still struggling feebly against his restraints, toward a patrol car parked just beyond the front entrance. Another officer knelt beside each of the 5 girls, checking their vitals and ensuring they were calm. Lucia looked up at Elena with wide, trusting eyes. Anna, Isabella, and Valentina sat stiffly, their gazes never drifting far from their father's retreating silhouette. Elena crouched beside Lucia, smoothing back the little girl's hair and offering her a soft smile. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she whispered. "I promise." Lucia nodded, clutching Elena's hand. Inside the clinic, staff gathered in small clusters, watching the police activity through the glass doors. Elena returned to the cashier's desk and picked up her discarded stethoscope. Carlos approached quietly and slipped her a folder. "Here," he said softly. "These are notes I kept, dates and times when things didn't add up, photos of empty sample racks." Elena took the folder, gratitude and guilt warring in her chest. "Thank you," she said. "I couldn't have done this without you." Carlos shook his head. "We're a team. No one should be scared into hiding crimes against kids." By the time the last handcuffs clicked shut, the sirens had fallen silent. The lead officer herded Elena and several witnesses into an empty office. He laid out several sets of documents, the original and falsified lab reports, police statements, and a warrant to seize Donnie Rain's records, and, if necessary, Dr. Briggs's personal logs. One by one, Elena and her colleagues gave their accounts. Dr. Patel, the on-call physician, described how he'd been surprised to find Ruiz's daughters quietly settled for hours without complaint. Nurse Alvarez recalled that the phlebotomy lab door had been left ajar when Donnie returned that evening. Marcus provided the digital audit trail showing Donnie's unlogged access to the database. Each piece of testimony tightened the case around Donnie, and by extension, the shadow of Dr. Briggs, whose private practice files were now subject to a state-ordered review. After the formal interviews, Elena stepped outside into the cool night air. The clinic's neon sign glowed softly against the dark sky, and the distant hum of the border town traffic sounded almost peaceful. She exhaled, feeling both exhaustion and relief. In the distance, the police car carrying Mateo and the evidence disappeared down the block. A small voice pulled her attention. Lucia stood beside her, clutching a thin blanket that had been draped over her shoulders. "Thank you," the little girl said simply, her eyes earnest, "for helping me." Elena knelt, embracing Lucia gently. "You're very brave," she replied, "and you're safe now. We'll make sure you and your sisters get all the care you need." Behind her, Carlos joined them, placing a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. "Tonight you saved 5 children." Elena allowed herself a weary smile. "We did it together." As they walked back into the clinic to see the girls settled into a safe observation room, Elena felt the full weight of the night's ordeal, but also a fierce gratitude. In a place where danger often lurked just beyond the front door, compassion and courage had prevailed, and 5 lives had been spared from disappearing into the darkness. Elena watched as the girls were gently guided into the unmarked CPS van, their small hands slipping from her grasp one by one until only Lucia remained. The little dancer's eyes, heavy with exhaustion, met Elena's once more. "Will I ever dance again?" she whispered. Elena knelt beside her, brushing a loose curl from Lucia's forehead. "Every time you feel safe," she promised, "you'll have all the dances in the world." As the doors closed and the van eased away under the flickering clinic lights, Elena felt the weight of the night begin to lift. She turned back toward the silent building, where no one would doubt a child's quiet compliance again, and resolved to see the Ruiz sisters safely settled, to testify against every adult who betrayed their trust, and to share their story with her colleagues so no one would ever look away. In the hush that followed, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. The clinic's doors swung shut for the night, but in her heart, a new chapter had opened, one of vigilance, compassion, and the unwavering belief that a single act of courage can rescue innocence from the brink. And in McAllen's dusty border air, Nurse Marquez quietly vowed she would keep watching, keep asking the hard questions, and keep dancing alongside every child who found their way back to freedom.